than the actual garlic. But it does form a clove like normal garlic, and you could use it in a similar way, and it does grow pretty well here. So within those subgroups of garlic, I'll start with the hardnecks first. We have subgroups within that hardneck class, I guess. So you have recambos, purple stripe types, Asiatic or turban types, Creole types, and porcelain types. And one of the main characteristics of a hardneck is that it has basically a flower stem that comes through that makes that neck hard. Versus a soft neck doesn't typically have a flower or scape that comes out, so it doesn't really have that hard neck. And so you could do things with soft necks like braiding them in the market, versus a hard neck you typically don't braid because it has that hard stem. Hard necks typically have a shorter shelf life, so after curing, it can only stay on the shelf for up to 3 to 4 months if you've cured it well enough and you have the right climate for it to store, which Hawaii typically doesn't have because it's so humid. There's some differences in flavor profiles, and from a market standpoint, it gives you a second product. And so the scapes are marketable. And for those of you that are physically here for the presentation, I do have kimchi garlic scapes for you to try. So you can see what some of the value added products you can develop from the hardnecks. So getting into these subclasses, recambos, they're probably one of the most widely grown hardneck groups, produce really large cloves. They can range in color from tan to brown. The scapes are curly, so that flower structure you see there coming out of the center, that's what a scape will look like. Loose skin, they can have 6 to 11 cloves within that bulb, and they store up to 4 to 6 months. And if you're planting 1 pound of seed, we'll give you about 60 plants. Seed meaning cloves. 1 pound of cloves will give you about 60 plants. Moving into the purple stripes, these ones have nice stripes on the outer wrapper, and so in the market it has visual characteristics that you could market as a certain type of garlic. These ones have 8 to 12 cloves per bulb, and they can store a little bit longer than the recambos for up to 6 months and have about the same amount of seed pieces per pound. The porcelains, they have this nice white wrapper leaf, about 4 to 6 cloves. And because of their large size, they can be mistaken for elephant garlic. They can store up to 6 months. And because of the size of clove, you only get about 40 plants per pound because of their larger clove size. And this is one of the groups, and specifically German white is one of the varieties that we're recommending. And inside that bag, for those of you who are going to come get seed, that's the variety it is German white. The other one is Asiatics. And so they size up pretty well after flower removal. And most hardnecks, to maximize the clove development, you have to go in and remove the scapes. And so if you're not going to market the scapes, it's kind of like wasted effort if you're not going to market the scapes, because you're going to have to go in to get that bulb development. They mature suddenly, so you have to harvest them as soon as those lower leaves begin to brown. If not, those wrapper leaves split open and it's sort of unmarketable. The cloves inside are okay, but when you see a garlic bulb on the market and you see them all split open, it's not something that you're probably going to pick out versus one that's nicely wrapped up inside the wrapper leaves. Relatively short shelf life, about 4 months, and about 45 plants per pound of seed. The turban group, they're very weak bolting and early maturing, so they may not produce the scapes like some of the other hardnecks. You harvest a week after seed heads emerge. They can be heavily striped and relatively short shelf life of 4 months. It has about 60 plants per seed. And then the last subgroup is this Creole group. Genetically, they're soft necks, but they still produce a scape. Have a nice silver skin, weak to bolt. They behave like hardnecks. They have solid purple cloves, weak flower stalks, but they can have a sweeter flavor compared to some of the other hardnecks that are a little bit more pungent and a little bit stronger flavor. And because they are typically a soft neck, they have that longer shelf life of 10 to 12 months. And because they have a little bit smaller cloves and a lot more cloves per bulb, you'll get up to 80 plants per pound of seed. The other group, the soft neck group, within that you have either artichokes or silver skins. This is probably the most common garlic you'll find in the market coming in from California or China or some of the other markets. You hardly see hardnecks in Hawaii's market anyway. I think if you went to the mainland, a lot of farmers markets, you'll see a lot more hardnecks versus softnecks. They typically have a more mild flavor and they have a longer shelf life of up to 1 year. And so the artichoke group, very vigorous and large bulbs. They may or may not form seeds or seed heads, and a lot of it's climate and stress related. They're named for their overlapping layers of cloves, which can mimic an artichoke, how the artichoke leaves will kind of fold over each other. About 3 to 5 cloves per layer, containing about 10 to 20 cloves per bulb. The outer cloves are typically flat and rounded, and the inner cloves may vary in shape from slender to flat. And about 65 plants per pound of seed. And then the silver skin is probably the most common one that you'll find in the market. It's the highest yielding softneck. It rarely produces a flower in our mild weather. Usually they're all white wrapper leaves. There's typically 3 clove layers, and you'll find up to 20 cloves per bulb. This one is the most popular for braiding because of that soft skin. It's a lot easier to tie up in a braid versus the hard necks. Lasts up to 12 months, about 70 plants per pound of seed. And some of the varieties listed below: Idaho Silver, Silver White, Mild French, S&H Silver, and California Select. And for the soft neck group, the Silver White is the one that we've been working with pretty good success at the higher elevation. So one of the best pace that we've found so far is in Lalamilo on the Big Island. Really dry climate, cold climate, higher elevation, and we'll get really nice size silver skin type garlic cloves or bulbs. And so after you decided what type of garlic you want to grow, it's getting the plant material to Hawaii can be a challenge because of restrictions on importation of plant material from other areas. And so the 2 main companies that I worked with in the last 5 years have been Fillory, which is in Eastern Washington, and then Southern Exposure will get seed from all over the place and ship it. But for the most part, the main one that I work with now is just Fillory because they're pretty consistent at getting material. And so if you're gonna buy seed material, I'd recommend ordering early. So as soon as Fillory opens up their seed order, which is probably in the summer, you order it then and you'll receive the seeds in October or November. That's typically when they get shipped out because they have to harvest their harvest from this year for next year's distribution. And if you wait till September, October, it's going to be all sold out because everybody's ordered, and you won't be able to get a significant amount of seed material to plant. So like I said, we trialed 31 varieties in the past, and I have some photos in the end of what they look like as far as what we harvested here in Hawaii. So when you're selecting a site for planting, you want to make sure it's a well-drained soil. High organic matter with a pH of 6 to 6.5 would be preferred. But I planted it in fields that are 5.5 and had pretty good success. So I'm on an Oxasaw soil, which is the red dirt soil on Oahu, and it had really good success at 600 feet elevation. If it's heavy clay or really rocky, you may have issues with malformed bulbs or poor drainage or other production issues if the soil itself is not light and fluffy. And if you have areas of heavy rainfall, especially if you have it during that bulb development and curing stages, you're going to have issues with splitting. And then your storage capability is going to go down significantly because that outer wrapper leaf is what basically seals in the cloves. And if you have a wet period during that kind of the end portion of the growing period, those wrapper leaves will tend to rot out and you'll have nothing to protect the cloves inside of the wrapper leaves, and you'll get really short shelf lives. And so in the past, from the past research, these have been the 3 locations that we've tested that we know that we can grow garlic successfully during the periods of time when we planted. So, which has been usually in January, February is the planting period, and we're harvesting in April, May, June is kind of the season that we've been focusing on, because when we've planted in the summertime, we've had really poor production, really poor development of cloves. And so this is kind of the period we're recommending, and you may find varieties that are out there that are successful throughout the year, but we just didn't have any luck with a short period of research time that we've had. And so garlic is almost exclusively vegetatively propagated. It's almost impossible to get actual true seed from garlic. My understanding is that when the scape comes out, they'll produce a flower. On that flower will actually be vegetative bulbs that come off the flower. There won't be actual true seed. And so the only way to generate true seed is to knock off every single bulbil off of that flower and then hope it pollinates, and then you get seed germination or seed production. And so it's almost impossible, from what I've read, that you will get actual true seed. And so majority of the propagation is through replanting of the cloves that you've generated from the previous harvest. Each individual clove should, after vernalization, should develop into a bulb that has multiple cloves. And so the challenge with Hawaii is that like I said earlier, we don't have that winter frost, which is required for vernalization. And vernalization basically means a chilling period to kind of break the dormancy of that garlic clove. And so in the US mainland, what typically happens is you'll plant in the fall, you'll put mulch over the top, it'll get a snowfall, that chilling will chill the clove underground, and then in the spring, the cloves will germinate and come up through the ground. Here, we can't do that. And so what we've been doing is using our refrigerator as our vernalization mechanism. Just a regular refrigerator at the normal 39 to 40 degrees inside the refrigerator has been adequate for vernalization. Basically, you're trying to induce the plant flowering process through the exposure of that cold winter weather. And usually we started off with 1 to 2 months of vernalization, but I've been recommending that if you're at a lower elevation, you leave it in for 3 months, because the cloves can de-vernalize and lose its, basically whatever vernalization process you put through it, it can lose it at a lower elevation where the temperature is a little bit warmer. And so when you receive your seed in October, we usually leave it into like January, February. And that's our kind of our planting schedule. Field prep, I recommend tillage so that it's easier to plant the cloves into the ground. The bed width can vary from 3 to 4 feet, which is typical. So in a bed, you'll put 2 drip tape and you can have 4 lines of garlic, 1 on each side of the drip tape, or however you decide you want to plant it. Our fields typically have 1 drip tape with two lines of garlic on each drip tape, and then we space it out that way. Weed management is relatively important. Because we're managing our fields conventionally, we typically are using a pre-emergent herbicide. So Goal or Goaltender is a pre-emergent herbicide that you can, so as soon as you plant the clove in the ground, that day we spray it over with Goal or Goaltender, and that's the chemical way to manage weeds within the field. You don't have any negative impact on the garlic itself, but it'll prevent germination of weed seeds in that field. That's the mechanism behind Goal or Goaltender. Other options include mulching or hand weeding are some of the other mechanisms for managing the weeds. And so Some of the organic growers that I work with on Maui, a lot of them will just heavily mulch the garlic after planting with either straw or some kind of other light mulch material. So planting, typically when you get your seed, they're going to be in whole bulbs. And so usually when I vernalize them, we leave them in the whole clove or the whole bulb so that it has that protective wrapper to kind of keep it from drying out. And then at planting or the day before planting, we'll break them all apart, put it in a bucket, and then go down the row and start planting. If you're not going to till the field, then one way you could do it is trench it out with a hoe or something and then drop seeds in the ground and then cover it up with soil. But if you are tilling and making it soft, it's pretty easy to just stick the clothes within the soil along the drip tape. If you leave it longer in the refrigeration, you'll typically see like that center picture, you'll see the shoots start to come out already. And I think some of the cloves in the bag have the shoots breaking through the wrapper leaves on the individual cloves. And then planting, make sure the tip is up and the roots are down. And then usually we're planting about 1 inch to 1.5 inches deep. Usually when I plant, the tip of the clove is just sticking up at the surface of the soil. It's about how deep I'm putting it in the ground. Usually you're spacing along the drip about 4 to 6 inches. And then, like I said, we put 1 drip tape out and 2 lines of garlic per drip tape, but on a bed, you could put multiple drip tapes and multiple lines of cloves. It depends on how you want to manage your field. And that's going to impact your yield per acre, how much row space you have versus planted area. The fertilizer schedule. So like every other crop, we recommend doing soil samples to make sure you have adequate nutrition in the field for your crop. We recommend putting in the phosphorus, calcium, and liming if you have to bring up your pH prior to planting. That's typical with every other crop. And then the generalization for production is 125 pounds of nitrogen, about 150 pounds of phosphorus, and 150 pounds of K. But if your soils have adequate phosphorus, you probably wouldn't have to add any more phosphorus to the soil. You could probably get away with just the phosphorus and the potassium. Irrigation, every area is different, but in generalizing it, it's about 1 inch of water per week during the dry months. If you have adequate rainfall in your area, you probably don't have to irrigate. I would leave that up to you, knowing what your weather patterns are and what kind of water you need to keep the soil adequately wet. Usually you cut off water or reduce water during the bulb development. This will help the bulbs increase in size and you'll minimize the rot to that wrapper leaf. And usually what we do is after scape removal, it's typically about a month after that, you'll start to see the clove kind of fully mature. And so that's kind of when we typically cut off waters. After we remove the scapes, we kind of either cut the water in half or shut it down completely, depending on the weather for that time of year. And approximately 90 days after planting, so about 3 months after planting is usually when you'll see the scapes coming out and when we cut water. I'm not sure how accurate this data is, but I pulled this off NOAA just for this general area on what the weather pattern looks like here. And so if you're planting in February, March, or January, February, you're looking at harvesting in May and June, which is at least the driest part according to the historical data for the last 20 years on when you would want to harvest. And so it matches with our planting schedule of that January, February planting schedule. Finishing up with that fertilizer, we've been doing fertilizer injections because we're doing it conventionally. We've been using mostly urea as our fertilizer source. We pre-planted everything except for the nitrogen. So every week we were applying a fraction of that 125 pounds of nitrogen as urea through a fertilizer injection system. And so in Kula, we use this dosatron type injection system. At Pomoho, we use a Venturi siphon. And then in Lalamilo, they use like a force injection system where they just pumped it into the irrigation line. So it doesn't matter how you get it into the ground, but splitting up the fertilizer seemed to help with the growth of the plant itself. So we're not over applying the nitrogen, but it was getting adequate fertility during that time. Most of the nitrogen demand is in that early vegetative growth stage. Approximately 6 weeks, we cut off that nitrogen fertilizer because we want more of that energy to go into the bulb development versus the vegetative growth. And then make sure you're not putting nitrogen on towards that last few months because it's going to prevent that excess vegetative growth and it'll help encourage that bulb development. So this is like a general fertilizer schedule of what we were using. So we pre-planted whatever calcium, phosphorus, and potassium we needed based on our soil test. And then every week, up to 6 weeks, we split up that fertility program of that 125 pounds of nitrogen. And it's about 54 pounds of urea every week, which will equivalent to 125 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And so if you don't want to use urea, you just switch that product out based on its nitrogen content for whatever fertilizer you want to use for your nitrogen source. So scapes, this is what the scapes would look like during that flowering period. Typically they'll have one scape per bulb. This last year we had something going on. I don't know if it was too much vernalization, but every clove seemed to have a scape. And so we had smaller cloves, but a lot more scapes this year. Ideally, you would want to harvest them when they're tender, they're young and tender. And so they'll come out curly. And as they mature, they'll straighten out. And so you want to harvest them when they're curly because that's when they're more tender. Once they start straightening out, like the pictures, you can see that one towards the left, upper left, it's almost straightened out completely. It's like eating a stick. And so it's not something I'd recommend if you're going to try and market scapes to the market. As soon as they come out kind of curly like pigtails. That's kind of when you want to take it because it's a lot tender, more tender. And then what else about scapes? If you're curious on planting from the bulbils, you could let them flower, and then it's going to be this flower with all these little tiny bulbs on them. You can break them off, plant them, but I think it takes 2 years from germination of those bulbs before you can get a marketable bulb. And so I wouldn't recommend it, but if you want like a lot of plant material, you have to just go through these extra steps. Monitoring growth throughout the year. And so the left image is a immature growth. You can see the leaves are completely green still yet, nothing has died off yet. And then I like to pull a couple out just to see what the size of the development within the cloves. And so a little hard to see, but this one has 6 cloves within this garlic, and there's a lot of wrapper leaves around it. I don't think I can make that better, but if for those of you online, you can probably see it a lot better. And then if you let it go too long, that's what splitting looks like, especially if you have a lot of rainfall during that harvest period. Basically, the cloves will break out of that wrapper leaf and start coming out. And you might be able to market it, but most of the market typically likes that enclosed cloves. Each clove has a wrapper leaf around it, and so it's somewhat still protected, but the storage life is going to be a lot shorter because you don't have that excessive wrapper leaves. And so usually the rule of thumb is the 4 leaves, when the 4th leaf dries and dies off, that's typically when it's harvest time because you have each leaf is a wrapper. And so you're left with at least 4 wrapper leaves around the set of cloves, so you have protection. There's not too many insect pests that you really have to worry about. If you've grown green onions or bulb onions before, it's basically the similar pests. You'll have like onion thrips bothering it. I'm not sure if the onion thrips will transmit the Irish yellow virus to garlic. I haven't seen that particular symptom, but they are on the plant. You may see mealybugs, root mealybugs on the base of the garlic plant. And then only one location we had leek moth issues which is this image, the leek moth will tunnel through the leaf and then you'll get some dieback on the leaf. Diseases are a little bit bigger issue. So you have downy mildew. There's a garlic mosaic virus, which you can see the streaking on the left. That's symptoms of garlic mosaic virus. And when I talk to the virologist, it doesn't seem like a big issue. It doesn't necessarily impact productivity, even if it has the virus. I think rust is a little bit bigger issue. So the rust is the image on the right. You can see that rusty fungus. That one will basically take down the leaves and you'll get poor production if you don't manage that particular fungus. And then there's Fusarium basal rot and pink rot, which is more of a root issue. If you do get your plants to harvest stage, it's about, based on number of plants and the weight per plant, it's estimated at about 5,000 to 7,000 pounds per acre. If you maximize the plant spacing and you had really good management of your field. Like I said, harvest is when you see those lower 40 to 60% of the leaves yellow. If you harvest too early, you have poor storage and if you have poor storage and you have underdeveloped cloves within that. If you're too late, you have splitting and also have poor storage. And then if that rain comes in that last month, it's going to be rough. We pulled out all of our stuff just to get it out of the rain. And sometimes it doesn't uniformly develop. And so you might lose yield because you're not getting 100% of the crop out of the field in time. For the most part, if you cut water, the roots will kind of die back too. And so it makes it a little bit easier to harvest because you can just pull it out. If you have water, the roots tend to start growing again. And then you're going to have to get a fork to pull it all out. So like the image here, we had rainfall during that harvest period. And so the roots start to regrow. And so we had to kind of dig out all the garlic from the field. But typically you'll see them kind of rise out of the field if you don't plant it too deep. And it's pretty easy to harvest. If you're planning on storing, the curing process is probably the most important. You want to make sure it's in a covered, dark, well ventilated area. Our Pomoho research station, we've been growing the Awahia bulb onions for the sea lab. And so we have these racks underneath our portable building. And so that's how we cure our bulbs, is just hang it on a string. We tie them in a bunch of 10 to 12 bulbs per bunch. We run the string and then we just split the bunch in half and just hang it on the string. And that's how we were kind of curing it at the station. I've seen other operations where there's a rack and they just put them all upside down on the rack. I think in the mainland, I've seen like pallets upside, like vertically, and they just hang them on the slats on the pallet. So whatever you have available to basically keep them somewhat separated and have good airflow, you get good curing. You're curing for about 3 weeks or until those the outer leaves basically dry up. And then after it's cured, you can kind of process them by cutting off the tops, cutting off the roots, whatever roots are left. And then typically you can remove that outer wrapper leaf, and then that'll expose that, it'll take off that dirty soil wrapper, and then you'll have the nice clean white wrapper leaf underneath, and then you can send that to the market. I wouldn't recommend this unless you know you're gonna have dry weather, but we have fences around our fields, and so what we're doing, we're just pulling them out and hang them on the fence. But you can see the weather in that picture. It was only on the fence for 1 day because it started raining. But if you don't expect rain, that's one way you could do it, is just hang it out on the fence and let it dry out. The slower you let it dry, the better it'll cure because it won't crack. And And then this is just some harvest data. So this is some of the characteristics of that Pomoho research station. This is what our field looked like. It's about 4,000 square feet. So these are the 31 varieties that we evaluated. This is the diameter. So one of the standards for USDA for #1 garlic is it has to be 1.5 inches in diameter or larger. And so everything above that blue line was 1.5 inches or larger. So it'll meet the criteria for #1 garlic. But you can see some of the garlics got up to 2.5 inches. And then just some of the bulb weights. So it gets up to about 90 grams. Not sure what that translates to in ounces, but that's some of the yield information for individual bulbs. And so German white is one of the standards that we're recommending. This is a porcelain type garlic. This is where you'd see that scape come out. And so that hard neck, this part of the stem is significantly harder because that stem will dry up and it's basically a stick inside of there. But this is about 4 cloves per garlic bulb. That Asiatic or turban group, it had pretty good development. Most of them in this group was above that 1.5 inch diameter and had really good yields, but the uniformity of harvest and the curing and the wrapper part of it, I think it was like 50% was this nice and the other 50% had a lot of splitting. More of the Asiatic type. So they grow well and they have other characteristics that some of the porcelain and other hardnecks don't have. Getting into a soft neck. So like I mentioned, it has the like artichoke characteristics. So it has like the way the cloves develop are more radial. And so you'll have like one clove here and the next clove will be inside and it'll kind of like be a leaf-shaped clove. And as the further you go in, the smaller the cloves get. So you'll have these large cloves on the outside and then they'll get smaller. And some of them will just have a lot of small cloves and they'll be like leaf shaped. But this particular variety had a lot of that splitting. And typically the market won't like that just because it's dirty. You can't peel the outer leaf off and make it nice and white. But it did have decent size and yield. And then silver skins. This is at Pomoho, and at our lower elevation, we didn't really have that good bulb development. At our Lalamilo station, we had a lot better yield from that. So for me, I don't recommend the silver skins at a lower elevation. I think the hard necks will do better. If you are going to go with a soft neck, I would choose the artichokes over the silver skins. And then if you want like a nice specialty type of garlic, these are really small, but they have really nice pigment to the wrapper. And so you could market it as such. It's white cloves on the inside, but it has a nice red, like that name, burgundy. It has like a nice red burgundy or rose colored wrapper leaf. I went over that. And then this is kind of the last one is the value addition. And so there's no way that we can compete with that California or import market. And so I think the only way for us in Hawaii to generate revenue is to find a niche market or a value added market for the garlic that's being grown, because we're not going to be growing on any economic scale. And so you're going to have to get the highest value for that product. And so working with KCC's Culinary Innovation Center, I don't know if you printed out the black garlic handout. One of the things that we were working on was black garlic. And so that'll give you a value added product. And maybe Emily can send it to you, all of you, if you are interested in the recipe. There's two ways. There's a conventional way, which is using a combi oven and a low temperature. The other one was you leave it in your rice cooker on warm, and you can do small batch black garlic. And the image on the left is one of the products. It doesn't look very nice, but it has that nice umami flavor. And this was all during COVID, so I don't know if you all were in a sourdough phase, but I was making a lot of sourdough pizza, and black garlic pizza is really good. And I had a lot of it because we had a lot of the project going on. Another value-added product is the scapes. And so I have samples for those of you in here for the kimchi scapes. I'm not sure if you can find it here on Hawaii, but on Oahu, I just got it from Times Supermarket. It's CTAHR is the brand that makes it. And to me, it's really good. Another thing you can use escapes for is like if you stir fry vegetables and you like to put garlic, you don't have to add more garlic because the garlic flavor is in the scape. And it has kind of like a green bean texture to me. It's like crunchy, snappy if you don't overcook it. But that's the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. This is still an ongoing project. So we're trying to find ways to make it more profitable for the industry that's hopefully going to develop from this work.
Online, you guys,